The counselor's hand on my shoulder felt like a lifeline as I watched my family's SUV disappear down the gravel road 3 days before pickup. I was 12 years old, standing in the July heat with my duffel bag at my feet, and I knew they weren't coming back on time. They never did. But this time was different. This time I remembered. I remembered dying at 37, alone in a hospital bed, my phone silent beside me. No calls, no visitors. Just me and the machines and the nurse who held my hand because no one else would. I remembered the bitter taste of regret, the crushing weight of a life spent trying to earn love from people who would never give it. And then I remembered opening my eyes in my childhood bedroom, 11 years old again, with a second chance burning in my chest like a phoenix rising from ash. Now at 12, standing at Camp Pinewood with the summer sun beating down on my neck, I felt that fire surge. Because this moment right here, this was where it had all started to crumble in my first life. This was where I'd learned that my family's neglect wasn't just casual forgetfulness, it was deliberate. "Are you sure they said Wednesday?" Counselor Mike asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Most families come on Saturday for family camp weekend." I nodded, forcing my voice to stay steady. "They have to leave early for my sister's gymnastics competition. It's really important." Mike's frown deepened, but he didn't push. He didn't know that in my first life, I'd waited on that same bench for 7 hours before they'd finally shown up, laughing and sunburned from the beach, with Madison's gold medal swinging from the rearview mirror. He didn't know that I'd spent those 7 hours crying so hard I'd made myself sick, while other families arrived and left around me, while other kids looked at me with pity. He didn't know that this time I wouldn't be crying. This time I had a plan. The memories hit me in waves as I walked back to my cabin, my rebirth knowledge unfolding like a dark flower. I remembered everything from my first life, every slight, every betrayal, every moment of choosing Madison over me. And there were so many moments. It started when I was born, really. Madison was already 5, already perfect, already the sun around which our family orbited. Mom and Dad had wanted one child. I was the surprise, the accident, the one they made work but never really wanted. They never said it out loud, not until the end. But I felt it in every forgotten birthday, every missed recital, every time they chose her over me. In my first life, I'd spent 37 years trying to make them love me. I'd been the perfect daughter, straight A's, scholarships, never asking for anything, always understanding when they missed my graduation to go to Madison's wedding, always forgiving when they forgot to call on my birthday, but never missed hers. I'd worked myself to the bone, became a successful lawyer, sent them money when Dad's business struggled, paid for Madison's failed boutique, covered Mom's medical bills, and when I got sick, when the cancer spread and the treatments failed, they visited once, for 45 minutes. Mom spent most of it on her phone coordinating Madison's third wedding. Dad complained about traffic. Madison didn't come at all. She was too stressed planning her honeymoon. I died alone, and in my last moments, I'd wished, prayed, for a chance to do it differently. Someone heard me. I woke up on my 11th birthday, the morning before they forgot it entirely. And this time, I knew the truth. I couldn't make them love me. But I could stop trying. I could stop giving them everything while they gave me nothing. I could save myself. The first year was reconnaissance. I watched, I learned. I confirmed that this life was following the same pattern as the first. Dad's contracting business was heading toward the same problems. Madison was on track to be the same spoiled, entitled, golden child. Mom was already showing the same favoritism, the same dismissiveness toward me. Even the family's long-estranged grandfather, Dad's father, who'd been cut off over some ancient argument about money and pride, was still out there, still wealthy, still alone. That last detail was important, very important, because in my first life, Grandfather Chen had died when I was 15, leaving his considerable fortune to charity because Dad had been too proud to reconcile. I'd only learned about it at my mother's dinner table years later, listening to her bitterly complain about the waste while simultaneously bad-mouthing the old man. The irony had been lost on them. But I remembered Grandfather Chen's obituary. I remembered the details about his software company, about his investments, about his love of classical music and his disappointment in his only son's materialistic values. I remembered enough to know that he might listen to a granddaughter he'd never met, if I could reach him. That was my advantage. Not just the memories, but the knowledge. I knew which investments would pay off. I knew which friends would betray me. I knew every trap Madison would set, every lie Mom would tell, every time Dad would choose his business over his daughter. I knew the future, and I could rewrite it. But first, I had to survive this summer camp. The pattern had started here at Camp Pinewood when I was 12. This was the summer that taught me I was alone. In my first life, after they'd left me waiting for 7 hours, I'd returned home quiet and withdrawn. Madison had mocked me for being dramatic. Mom had told me I was too sensitive. Dad had barely looked up from his phone. That was when something in me broke. I stopped trying so hard. I pulled inward. And they barely noticed because they'd never really been paying attention anyway. But that withdrawal, that broken spirit, had defined the rest of my first life. I'd become someone who accepted scraps, someone who believed she didn't deserve better, someone who gave and gave and gave because maybe, someday, it would be enough. Not this time. This time, when they left early, when they abandoned me for Madison's gymnastics competition, I was ready. I spent the next 3 days at camp being the perfect camper. I smiled. I participated. I made sure Counselor Mike saw me making friends, saw me thriving, saw me completely fine with my family's absence. When Saturday came and families started arriving for family camp weekend, I positioned myself perfectly. Visible, but not desperate. Happy, but appropriately reserved. And when my family finally pulled up at 6 p.m., 6 hours late, laughing, Madison's medal catching the light, I let Counselor Mike see my face before I smoothed it over. Let him see the hurt flash across my features. Let him see me quickly hide it with a smile. "Amelia," Mom called out, not even apologizing for the time. "Come help with the bags. We have so much to tell you about Madison's competition." I walked slowly toward them, aware of Mike's eyes on my back, aware of other families watching, aware that I was planting seeds. "You're late," I said quietly when I reached them, just loud enough for Mike to hear. "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "We're here now. Madison won gold. It was incredible. You should have seen her on the floor routine." "I waited," I continued, my voice small but clear. "You said Wednesday. I waited all day Wednesday." Dad finally looked up from his phone, irritation flashing across his face. "We told you Saturday, Amelia. Don't start with this attention-seeking behavior." But I'd heard him tell Mike on the phone that morning that they'd mixed up the dates. I'd been standing right there, and Mike had heard it too. "Mr. Chen," Mike approached carefully, "I think there might have been some miscommunication. Amelia was under the impression, my daughter tends to be dramatic." Dad cut him off with a tight smile. "She's fine. Aren't you, Amelia?" This was the moment. In my first life, I'd nodded. I'd swallowed my hurt and climbed into the car and let them rewrite reality. I'd let them make me feel crazy for remembering what they'd actually said. Not this time. "No," I said softly, "I'm not fine. You told me Wednesday. You left me waiting." Madison rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Amelia, stop being such a baby. We're here now, aren't we? Why do you always have to ruin everything?" "Madison," Mike said firmly, that's not. "We need to go," Dad interrupted, his jaw tight. "We have a long drive. Amelia, car, now." I climbed into the back seat, not looking at anyone. Let them think I was cowed. Let them think I was the same Amelia who would swallow her pain and move on. But as we drove away, I caught Mike's troubled expression in the side mirror, and I knew he'd remember this. When the time came, he'd remember the HUD. Ride home was exactly like my first life. Madison talked endlessly about her competition. Mom cooed over every detail. Dad occasionally grunted approval. I sat in the back, invisible, listening to them dissect Madison's performance with the kind of attention they'd never once given to my honor roll certificates or my writing awards or anything I'd ever done. "Did you see how I stuck that landing?" Madison was saying. "Coach Sarah said it was perfect. She said I could make nationals if I keep training this hard." "Of course you will, sweetheart," Mom said warmly. "You're incredible." I stared out the window, calculating. In my first life, Madison had made nationals but blown her knee out 2 years later, ending her gymnastics career. She'd spiraled, became depressed, and my parents had poured thousands into therapy, boutique business attempts, and supporting her through 3 failed marriages. Meanwhile, I'd put myself through college on scholarships they never acknowledged, built a successful career they never celebrated, and sent them money they never thanked me for. Not this time. This time, I would protect my resources. I would protect my future, and I would let them reap exactly what they sowed. The plan crystallized over the next 3 years. I was patient, I was careful, I played the long game because I knew every move they'd make before they made it. When I was 13, Dad's contracting business hit the same rough patch it had in my first life. He needed $50,000 to cover a gap between expenses and payment on a big job. In my first life, he'd taken out a second mortgage on the house, which had eventually led to him losing it in the 2008 financial crisis. The family had moved into a cramped apartment, bitter and diminished, and somehow they'd blamed me for not contributing enough, even though I was 16 and working 2 part-time jobs to pay for college applications while Madison's room was filled with gymnastics equipment they'd financed. This time, I watched him struggle. I watched him stress. And when he was at his lowest, I didn't offer the babysitting money I'd saved. Instead, I quietly used the computer at the library to send an anonymous tip to one of his business rivals about the job opportunity. They swooped in with a better offer to the client. Dad lost the contract. He had to take the second mortgage anyway, but now he had no big payment coming to cover it. The spiral began earlier this time, steeper. I felt nothing but satisfaction. When I was 14, I finally reached out to Grandfather Chen. I found his address through old photos in the attic, used birthday money to buy stamps, and wrote him a letter. Not as a desperate grandchild begging for money, but as someone interested in his life, his work, his passions. I mentioned that I'd taught myself to play his favorite Chopin pieces on our old piano, the one Mom kept threatening to sell for Madison's competition fees. I mentioned that I loved reading about early software development, about innovation, about building something meaningful. I didn't mention my parents at all, except to note that I'd found his address in old family papers and hoped it wasn't presumptuous to write. He wrote back 3 weeks later. His handwriting was spidery but strong. He said he was surprised to hear from me, that he'd wondered about his grandchildren but respected his son's wish for distance, that he'd love to know more about my interests and whether I really did play Chopin or was simply flattering an old man. I wrote back immediately, pouring genuine passion into my description of music, of technology, of ideas. And I included a cassette tape of me playing Nocturne Op. 9, number 2, his favorite, according to the obituary I'd read in my first life. We became pen pals. Then, when I was 15, he invited me to visit him during spring break. My parents, sending money, suddenly couldn't be more supportive of my relationship with Grandfather. Dad tried to coach me on what to say, how to act, how to mention the family's struggles. I smiled and nodded and ignored every word. Grandfather Chen lived in a beautiful house overlooking the bay, filled with books and music and memories. He was 83, sharp as a tack, and utterly alone. We spent a week together, and I felt something I'd never experienced before, genuine family love. He asked about my thoughts, my dreams, my opinions. He taught me chess and let me win only when I deserved it. He played Chopin with me in duets, his old hands still nimble on the keys. On the last day, over breakfast, he asked me directly, "Why does your father never mention you when we speak on the phone?" The question surprised me. "You speak to Dad?" "He calls occasionally, usually when he needs money." Grandfather's smile was dry. "He talks extensively about your sister's gymnastics career. He's mentioned you precisely 3 times in 6 years. Twice to say you were fine, once to say you were doing well in school, I guess." I looked down at my tea. In my first life, I'd never known these conversations happened. Madison is easier to talk about. She's more interesting. "You play Chopin like someone who understands heartbreak," Grandfather said quietly. "You write letters like someone who's learned to be alone. You're 15 years old. That troubles me." I met his eyes. This was the moment. The turning point. In my first life, he'd died never knowing how bad it was, never knowing I existed beyond a vague concept. This time, I could be honest, but I had to be careful. I couldn't seem like I was manipulating him. The truth had to speak for itself. They're not bad people, I said slowly. They're just limited. They have room in their hearts for Madison. They tried to make room for me, but I was unexpected, and they never quite managed it. I learned to be okay with that. Are you okay with it? I'm learning to be okay with me, I said. That's better. Grandfather was quiet for a long moment. Then, would you like to spend your summers here? With me. My heart jumped. This was more than I'd hoped for. Really? I'm an old man, Amelia. My own son barely tolerates me, and only for financial reasons. But you remind me of why I built my company in the first place. Curiosity, passion, the joy of learning. I'd like to cultivate that in you, if you'll let me. I'd love that, I whispered. Good. We'll tell your parents it's an internship. I'll pay for your flights. You'll work in my company's youth program. Really work, not nepotism. And learn about business and technology. And in the evenings, we'll play Chopin and chess and talk about ideas. Deal? Deal. We shook on it, his old hand warm and steady in mine. And I felt the future shift, tectonic plates rearranging themselves into something new. Something that was finally mine. The next 3 years were transformative. Every summer, I lived with Grandfather Chen. I worked genuinely hard at his company, starting at the bottom with data entry and working my way up to assisting with software testing and user experience research. He paid me fairly, and I saved every penny. During the school year, I maintained perfect grades, but I stopped trying to get my parents' attention. When Madison got injured and had to quit gymnastics at 16, devastating our family, I offered quiet sympathy and nothing more. When she spiraled into depression and Mom needed someone to vent to, I listened politely and then went back to my homework. When Dad's business finally went under when I was 17 and they lost the house, I helped pack my own things and moved without complaint to the cramped apartment, keeping my head down and my plans close. They barely noticed. I'd trained them over years to overlook me, and now it worked in my favor. Madison was the crisis. Madison needed therapy, needed support, needed a new purpose after gymnastics. Madison. I was just Amelia, quiet and self-sufficient, doing fine on her own. Perfect. What they didn't know was that Grandfather was teaching me everything. Financial planning, investment strategy, business development. He'd also changed his will, though I wouldn't know the full extent until later. What I did know was that he'd set up a trust fund for my college education and beyond, one my parents couldn't touch, couldn't access, couldn't even know about until I turned 18. You're going to do remarkable things, he told me on my 17th birthday during one of our weekly phone calls. You have something your father never had, genuine empathy paired with steel. You care about people, but you won't let them destroy you. That's rare. I learned from experience, I said quietly. I know you did. His voice was sad. I wish I'd known sooner. I wish I'd reached out to you myself instead of waiting for you to find me. But we have now, Amelia, and I'm going to make sure you have the resources to build the life you deserve. He died 3 months later, peacefully in his sleep at 87. I was devastated, genuinely, deeply devastated. He'd been the only person in my life who saw me, valued me, loved me for who I was. The funeral was small. He'd requested it that way. I sat in the front row crying silent tears while my parents sat stiffly beside me and Madison texted on her phone. Dad kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, I'd understand it was calculation. Grandfather's lawyer had contacted him about the will reading, and Dad was wondering how much I might inherit, how much he could claim, how much he could use to fix his failing life. The answer was all of it and none of it, depending on perspective. The will reading was 2 weeks later. I was 17 years old, 3 months from graduation, sitting in a lawyer's office with my parents and Madison. Dad was practically vibrating with anticipation. Mom kept shooting me meaningful looks, clearly expecting me to share whatever I inherited with the family. Madison looked bored. The lawyer, Ms. Rodriguez, was a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a steel spine. She'd known grandfather for 30 years. She looked at my parents with thinly veiled contempt and at me with something like compassion. Mr. Chen's estate is valued at approximately $43 million, she began. Mom gasped. Dad sat up straight. Madison's head snapped up from her phone. The estate is divided as follows, Ms. Rodriguez continued, ignoring their reactions. To his son, David Chen, he leaves his collection of first edition books and the family photographs, with a note that says, "You never wanted my money when it came with the expectations of character. Have what you always truly valued, the things, not the relationship." Dad's face went white, then red. He can't. To his granddaughter, Madison Chen, he leaves $10,000 with the hope that she discovers real passion, not just talent. Madison's mouth fell open. 10,000? That's to his granddaughter, Amelia Chen, Ms. Rodriguez said, and her voice softened. He leaves the remainder of his estate, including his house, his company stock, his investment portfolio, and all other assets, held in trust until her 18th birthday, at which point she gains full control. The trust is irrevocable and cannot be contested, as Mr. Chen had the foresight to have his competency evaluated and documented specifically to prevent such attempts. The room exploded. "This is insane!" Dad roared, surging to his feet. "She's 17. She doesn't know anything about managing money. She's been his protege for 3 years," Ms. Rodriguez said calmly. "She's worked at his company. She's proven herself responsible. And it was his money to do with as he pleased. This is my father's money, family money. She can't just She can," Ms. Rodriguez said firmly. "And she will. Amelia, the trust includes a generous annual stipend that begins immediately for your living expenses and education. You'll receive approximately $100,000 per year until you turn 18, at which point you'll have full access to everything. In the meantime, I'll be managing the investments as your trustee, per your grandfather's instructions." I sat very still, tears streaming down my face, not calculated tears, real ones. Because grandfather had known. He'd known exactly what my family was like, and he'd protected me anyway. He'd given me not just money, but freedom. "Thank you," I whispered. Mom turned on me, her face ugly with anger. How dare you? How dare you manipulate that old man?" "I didn't manipulate anyone," I said quietly. "I wrote him letters, I visited him, I loved him. Maybe if you'd tried that with your own father-in-law, instead of treating him like an ATM when you needed something and ignoring him the rest of the time, things would be different." "You ungrateful little—" "We're done here," Ms. Rodriguez said sharply. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen Madison, you're welcome to contest the will, but I assure you it's airtight." Mr. Chen anticipated every possible challenge and prepared accordingly. "This meeting is over." The car ride home was silent and violent with unspoken rage. When we got to the apartment, Dad turned on me immediately. "You're giving us that money," he said flatly. "I'm your father. That was my father. The money should have come to me." "No," I said. "No," Mom's voice was shrill. "After everything we've done for you, fed you, housed you, raised you?" "The bare minimum required by law," I said calmly. In my first life, this confrontation had destroyed me. This time, I'd prepared for it, rehearsed it, knew exactly what I'd say. "You've given me nothing that you weren't legally obligated to provide. And often, you didn't even do that. Grandfather saw who I was and valued me. That's why he left me his estate. You can be angry about it, but it won't change anything." "You're still a minor," Dad said, his voice dangerous. "Living under my roof, if you want to stay here—" "I don't," I interrupted. Ms. Rodriguez has already arranged for me to live with a friend from school whose family has a guest house. The trust will pay them rent. I'll be moving out this weekend. I'd planned this too. Jenny's family had been kind to me for years, bewildered by my family dynamics. When I'd asked if I could rent their guest house for the last 3 months before college, they'd agreed immediately. Madison found her voice finally. You're going to regret this, Amelia. You think you're so smart, so special, but you're just a manipulative little Don't, I said, my voice cutting through hers like a blade. Don't you dare. I'm not the one who's made your life difficult, Madison. I'm not the one who pushed you so hard you blew out your knee. I'm not the one who made you think your worth was tied to medals and trophies. That was them. I gestured at our parents. I was just the convenient person to ignore while they poured everything into you. And you know what? You can have them. You can have all of their attention, all of their focus, all of their conditional love. I have something better now. What's that? She sneered. Money? Freedom, I said simply. And the knowledge that I'm worth more than what I can do for other people. Grandfather taught me that. You should try learning it sometime. I walked to my room, really just a corner of the living room with a curtain, and started packing. They didn't follow me. And when I moved out 3 days later, they didn't help. Jenny's dad came with a truck, helped me load my few possessions, and drove me to my new home without asking questions. Your grandfather sounds like he was a good man, he said finally as we pulled into their driveway. The best, I agreed, and my voice only shook a little. The last 3 months of high school were strange and wonderful. Living in Jenny's guest house, I had privacy for the first time in my life. The trust stipend covered rent, food, and expenses with plenty left over. I focused on my studies, finished with a 4.0 GPA, and got accepted to every college I applied to, including Stanford, my first choice. My parents didn't come to my graduation. Madison didn't either. They sent a card that said, "Congratulations," with no message inside, no signature beyond their printed names. I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt relief. The final cord was cut. What I did feel was joy when grandfather's friends from his company came to watch me walk across the stage, when Ms. Rodriguez and her wife brought me flowers, when Jenny's family threw me a small party. These were people who'd chosen to care about me, not people obligated by blood. That summer, before college, Ms. Rodriguez helped me understand the full scope of the inheritance. $43 million was the estate value, but with the trust's careful management and the stock portfolio's growth, I was looking at closer to $50 million by the time I turned 18. The house alone was worth $8 million. So your grandfather was very smart, Ms. Rodriguez explained. He set up the trust so that you'd have time to mature, to learn, to grow into this responsibility. He didn't want you overwhelmed at 17, but he also made sure you were protected. Your parents can't touch this, can't sue for it, can't access it in any way. It's yours. What did he tell you about me? I asked. In his instructions? She smiled. He said you were the best thing his family ever produced, and he wasn't going to let them waste you. He said you had a good heart and a strong mind, and the combination would change lives. He wanted to give you the tools to do that. I cried then, missing him fiercely, but they were good tears, healing tears. College was a revelation. At Stanford, I was just Amelia, not the overlooked sister, not the disappointing daughter, just me. I studied computer science and business, joined clubs, made real friends, and slowly learned how to trust that I was worth people's time and attention. I kept in touch with Ms. Rodriguez, who continued managing the trust masterfully. By the time I turned 18, halfway through my freshman year, the estate had grown to $55 million. On my birthday, she transferred full control to me, along with a final letter from grandfather that he'd written before he died. Dear Amelia, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're 18. You're probably scared. That's okay. Being responsible for this kind of wealth is frightening, especially when you're young. But I believe in you. I've watched you for 3 years, and I've seen your character. You're kind without being weak. You're intelligent without being cruel. You care about justice and fairness and building things that matter. That's why I chose you. Your father would have wasted this money trying to recapture his youth or prove something meaningless. Your mother would have enabled him. Your sister would have spent it searching for external validation she can only find inside herself. But you'll use it wisely. You'll build something meaningful, you'll help people. Don't let guilt or obligation draw you back into their orbit. They made their choices long before you were born. You owe them nothing beyond basic civility. You owe yourself everything. Live well, love truly, build beautifully. Make me proud. Not because I'm watching, but because you're becoming who you were always meant to be. With all my love, Grandfather Chen. I sat in my dorm room, crying over that letter for an hour. Then I dried my eyes, pulled up my computer, and started planning. Planning for the future I would build. Planning for the life I would create. Planning for the justice I would finally, completely deliver. Because my family hadn't gone away. They'd been calling, texting, emailing, trying to worm their way back into my life now that I had full control of the money. Dad's business had completely failed. They'd been evicted from their apartment and were living with my aunt. Madison had dropped out of community college and was working retail. They were struggling and they thought I'd save them. In my first life, I would have. I would have sacrificed myself, drained my resources, destroyed my own future trying to fix theirs. I would have convinced myself it was the right thing, the kind thing, the loving thing. This time, I knew better. The first contact after my 18th birthday was an email from Mom, 3 days after the trust transfer. Amelia, I hope college is going well. We miss you so much. The house feels empty without you, though we're actually staying with Aunt Linda now, long story. I wanted to reach out because your father's been having some health issues. Nothing serious, but the medical bills are piling up. We don't have insurance right now, and things are tight. I know you came into your inheritance recently, and I'm so happy for you. Grandfather would be proud. Could you help us out with about $30,000 to cover the bills? It would mean the world to us. We're family, after all. Love, Mom. I read it twice, noting the manipulation. The false warmth, the guilt tripping, the assumption that I'd just hand over money. The "we're family" line, as if that had ever mattered to them when I was the one who needed something. I replied with one line. I'm sorry to hear about Dad's health. I hope things improve. I won't be providing financial assistance. The response came within an hour, and it was from Dad this time, much less friendly. Amelia, your mother tells me you're refusing to help with my medical bills. I'm disappointed but not surprised. You've always been selfish. But let me be clear, that money should have been mine. You manipulated a senile old man into giving you what was rightfully your family's inheritance. The least you can do is help your own father when he's sick. If you don't send the money, don't bother contacting us again. You're not the daughter I raised. David, I felt the old hurt try to surface, that desire to prove I wasn't selfish, to show I was good enough, to earn his love. But I crushed it ruthlessly. This was who he'd always been. I just hadn't let myself see it before. I didn't reply. 3 days later, Madison called. I let it go to voicemail. Amelia, it's Madison. Look, I know we've had our issues, but you seriously need to help Mom and Dad. They're in bad shape, and you're sitting on millions of dollars. Don't be a bitch about this. They raised you. You owe them. Call me back. I deleted the message. 2 weeks later, they showed up at Stanford. I was walking back from class when I saw them standing outside my dorm. Mom, Dad, Madison, looking out of place and desperate. My stomach clenched, but I kept walking. I'd known this might happen. I'd prepared. Amelia! Mom called out when she spotted me. She rushed over, trying to hug me. I stepped back. What are you doing here? We came to see you, she said, tears already forming, real or fake. I couldn't tell anymore. You won't answer our calls or emails. We're worried about you. No, you're not, I said calmly. Batan. You want money? I said no. That should have been the end of it. We're your family, Dad said, his voice hard. You don't just abandon family. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. You mean like you abandoned me at camp for 7 hours when I was 12? Like you forgot my birthday 4 years in a row? Like you didn't show up to my high school graduation? Like you didn't visit me in the hospital when I had appendicitis at 14? That last one was from my first life, but the pattern was the same. That kind of abandonment? We had reasons, Mom started. You always do, I interrupted. And they're always about Madison or Dad's business or something more important than me. I get it. I've always gotten it. You don't love me. You never have. You tolerated me because you had to, and now you want my money because you need it. But I don't owe you anything. You manipulative little. Madison started forward, but I pulled out my phone. Campus security is on speed dial, I said calmly. I'll call them if you don't leave. You're not authorized to be here, and you're harassing me. I will press charges. Dad's face went purple. After everything we've done, you've done nothing, I said, and my voice was cold. Nothing but make me feel worthless for 17 years. Grandfather saw that. He saw who you really were, and he protected me from you. Now I'm protecting myself. Leave. Don't come back. Don't call. Don't email. We're done. You're going to regret this, Dad spat. When you need us, I won't, I said simply. Because I have people who actually love me. You're not them. Goodbye. I walked past them into my dorm and didn't look back. My hands were shaking, but I felt powerful, free. I'd finally said everything I'd wanted to say in my first life and never had the courage to voice. They left, and for a while that was the end of it. But Madison couldn't let it go. Over the next year, she tried everything. She created fake social media accounts to send me messages about what a terrible person I was. She contacted some of my friends with lies about me stealing grandfather's money. She even tried to spread rumors at Stanford that I was a fraud, that the inheritance was illegal, that I'd seduced a dying old man for his wealth. None of it worked. Ms. Rodriguez helped me document everything for a potential restraining order. My real friends knew the truth. And Stanford's administration, when Madison tried to contact them with her accusations, told her firmly to stop harassing their student or face legal consequences. But Madison's obsession gave me an idea. A way to end this permanently, to deliver the justice I'd been planning for years. Because I'd been watching them all this time, monitoring them. And I knew things they didn't know I knew. I knew that Dad had been committing insurance fraud with his failed contracting business, filing false claims, inflating damages, pocketing the difference. Small-scale stuff that had gone unnoticed, but it was still very illegal. I had documentation from my time living with them, old papers I'd quietly photographed and saved. I knew that Madison had been stealing from the retail store where she worked, just little things, but enough to constitute a pattern. She'd posted about it obliquely on social media, thinking she was clever. She wasn't. I knew that Mom had been faking medical issues to scam prescription pain medications, which she then sold online. I'd seen the packages, the websites, the transactions when I'd still lived with them. They were all small-time criminals, and they thought they were smart enough to get away with it. They weren't. I took all my documentation to Ms. Rodriguez. I want to know if this is actionable, I said. Legally. She looked through everything, her expression growing more troubled. Amelia, this is serious. If you report this, they'll face consequences, I finished. I know, they've been harassing me for a year. They've tried to ruin my reputation. They've refused every boundary I've set. I'm done being kind. You understand that your father could face federal charges for the insurance fraud? Prison time? Yes. Your sister could be arrested for theft? Yes. Your mother could face serious drug charges? Yes. Ms. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure about this? There's no going back once you make these reports. I thought about my first life, about dying alone, about all the years I'd wasted trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it, about how they'd bled me dry and then abandoned me when I had nothing left to give. I'm sure, I said. They made their choices. Now they get to face the consequences. All right, she said quietly. I'll help you file the reports properly, but Amelia, make sure this is about justice, not revenge. Revenge will poison you. Justice, real justice, is about protecting yourself and others from harm. It's justice, I said firmly. They're committing crimes. They need to stop. And so we filed the reports. Federal investigators for the insurance fraud, local police for the theft and prescription fraud, everything documented, everything verified, everything legal. The arrests happened over 3 months, staggered as different agencies worked through the cases. Dad first, led away from Aunt Linda's house in handcuffs while the neighbors watched. Then Mom arrested at the pharmacy where she was trying to fill another fake prescription. Finally, Madison caught on camera stealing from the mall store where she worked. I wasn't there for any of it. I heard about it through the grapevine, through Ms. Rodriguez, through the occasional news article about local insurance fraud ring exposed. I felt nothing but a quiet satisfaction. They'd made their choices. Now they were facing consequences for the first time in their lives. But the story didn't end there, because Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, who I'd barely known, called me 2 weeks after the arrests. "Amelia," she said, her voice tired, "I know we've never been close, but I need to talk to you about your parents." "I'm not helping them," I said immediately. "I'm not asking you to," she said. "I'm asking you to understand something. Your parents were arrested because of evidence you provided. Is that correct?" My heart skipped. "I reported crimes I witnessed, yes." "I thought so," she sighed. "Look, I'm not saying they didn't deserve it. David has always been a selfish bastard and your mother enabled him for years. But they're still my family and I need you to know something. Your father's going to prison, probably for 18 months. Your mother's looking at mandatory rehab and probation. Madison's got community service and a record." "Good," I said coldly. "Is it?" Aunt Linda asked. "Because they're destroyed, Amelia, completely destroyed. Your father's business is gone. Your mother's having a breakdown. Madison's spiraling, and part of me wonders if you did this out of justice or revenge." "Does it matter?" I asked. "They committed crimes. They harassed me. They made their choices." "Everyone makes choices," Aunt Linda said quietly. "But there's a difference between protecting yourself and crushing people who've already fallen. I'm not saying forgive them. I'm not saying help them. But I am saying that revenge isn't the same as justice, and it won't heal what they broke in you." She hung up before I could respond. Her words haunted me for days. Was she right? Had I gone too far? They'd committed actual crimes. I'd just reported them. But I'd done it knowing it would destroy them, wanting it to destroy them. I talked to my therapist about it. Yes, I'd started therapy at Stanford, working through the damage of my childhood. She helped me understand something crucial. Justice and revenge can look the same from the outside, she said. The difference is in your heart. Why did you report them? "To stop them from hurting me," I said. "To make sure they couldn't keep harassing me." "And was there a part of you that wanted them to suffer? Be honest." I was quiet by it for a long time. "Yes," I finally admitted. "I wanted them to feel what I felt, powerless, abandoned, alone." "That's human," she said gently. "After what they did to you, that's completely human. But now you have a choice. You can let that revenge poison you, or you can acknowledge it, process it, and choose to move forward. They're facing consequences. You're safe. The question is, what do you want your life to be about now?" What did I want my life to be about? Not them, not revenge, not proving anything to people who would never care. I wanted to build something good, something meaningful, something that honored grandfather's faith in me. I graduated from Stanford at 22 with degrees in computer science and business. I'd spent my college years not just studying, but planning. I'd used a portion of my inheritance to invest in startups, to support causes I believed in, to build a foundation that provided scholarships for first-generation college students from abusive homes. I'd turned $55 million into $80 million through careful investments and smart choices, and I'd stayed away from my family completely. Dad got out of prison when I was 23. He'd served 18 months and was broken, no longer the confident, dismissive man I remembered. Mom completed rehab but relapsed twice, finally getting clean when I was 25. Madison drifted, working dead-end jobs. Still bitter and angry at the world, they tried to contact me a few times, letters mostly. Apologetic at first, then angry, then apologetic again. I read them once and filed them away. I didn't respond. Aunt Linda was right about one thing. Revenge hadn't healed me, but neither had their apologies. Therapy healed me. Time healed me. Building a life I was proud of healed me. Distance healed me. By the time I was 27, I'd launched my own software company focused on creating tools for nonprofit organizations. We were small but successful, profitable but purposeful. I had a team I trusted, friends I loved, and a life that finally felt like mine. And then I got a call from an estate lawyer I didn't know. "Ms. Chen, I'm calling about your father, David Chen. He's listed you as next of kin." My blood went cold. "Is he dead?" "No, but he's very ill. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He's asking to see you. He says it's important." "No," I said immediately. "Ms. Chen, I understand there's a difficult history, but he's dying. He has weeks, maybe days. He wants to talk to you, to apologize." "He had years to apologize," I said. "He chose not to. I'm not interested." "I'll pass along your response," the lawyer said quietly. "But if you change your mind, call this number." I didn't change my mind. Dad died 3 weeks later. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent flowers. It seemed like the appropriate level of acknowledgement, but I didn't go. Mom called me afterward, crying, "How could you not come? He was your father." "He stopped being my father when I was 12 years old," I said calmly, "when he left me at camp and never looked back. Everything after that was just confirmation." "He wanted to tell you he was sorry." "I don't care," I said. And I realized it was true. I didn't care anymore. Not about his apology, not about his regrets, not about any of it. I'd moved on. They were ghosts to me, distant memories of a life I'd left behind. "Mom, I hope you find peace. I genuinely do, but I can't be part of your life and you can't be part of mine. Please don't call again." I hung up and blocked her number. I'm 32 now. 5 years past the age I died in my first life. My company is thriving. My foundation has helped hundreds of students escape situations like mine. I have friends who feel like family, a partner who loves me for who I am, and a life filled with meaning. I still think about my family sometimes, about Madison, who I hear through the grapevine finally got therapy and is working on herself, about Mom, who's been sober for 4 years and volunteers at a women's shelter, about Dad, who died probably full of regrets but never quite willing to truly acknowledge what he'd done. I don't hate them anymore. I don't really feel anything for them. They're people who hurt me badly, and I survived them, and now I'm thriving without them. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have given them another chance, if reporting their crimes was justice or revenge. But then I remember, they had chances. Hundreds of chances over 17 years to see me, to value me, to love me. They chose not to. And when I finally chose myself, they called me selfish. That tells me everything I need to know. I visit grandfather's grave sometimes. I keep it beautiful with fresh flowers and tell him about my company, my foundation, my life. I thank him for seeing me when no one else would, for giving me the tools to save myself. And sometimes on quiet nights, I think about that 12-year-old girl standing at summer camp watching her family drive away. I think about how alone she felt, how abandoned. I wish I could go back and tell her, it gets better, you get stronger, you build something beautiful, and you never, ever need them again. Because I don't need them. I never did. I just needed permission to save myself. And grandfather gave me that. The money was just the tool. The real gift was teaching me that I was worth saving. Now I spend my life proving him right, not for him, but for me. Not because I need to earn love, but because I deserve to give it to myself. My family left me at summer camp early, abandoned me for someone they loved more, and showed me exactly who they were. After my rebirth, I never came back to them. And I've never been happier.